So welcome, good morning, obviously happy Friday. My name is Lauren Smith-Petta, and I work for Jumpstart as Director of Education. Today's session is our first in a monthly series called The State of AI, and is focused on monthly highlights and the headlines of AI, what you need to know in 30 minutes, and how to successfully and ethically apply these tools to your business today. Jumpstart offers another webinar series on different topics every month, along with a variety of other educational programs and events. Visit jumpstartinc.org/smallbiz to explore our services. Before I introduce our presenter today, a few housekeeping items. This presentation session is a mere 30 minutes. Another 30 minutes will be set aside for the Q&A portion specifically. In your toolbar, you should be able to see an important communication tool at your disposal today, the chat. I will be closely monitoring the chat throughout, so please place your questions there. Make sure to click on the blue box in the chat and select everyone. At the end of today's session and in a follow-up email on Monday, you'll receive a brief survey via email as well as content from today's presentation. We appreciate your feedback. It allows us to continue to bring in wonderful experts to teach valuable lessons for free and to bring Bradley back next month for another AI webinar. All right, without further ado, allow me to introduce our presenter today, Bradley Reynolds. Bradley is an experienced technology executive and serial entrepreneur with over 25 years in the industry. He has founded and led several successful tech-based startups, including Mongoose Metrics, and Expedient, taking them from inception to successful exits. He has deep experience in cloud computing, data architecture, software design, AI, and enterprise large language models. He is currently an AI consultant focused on helping enterprises adopt private ChatGPT-like systems safely and strategically. He advises on AI strategy, architecture, implementation, and operations. In other words, we're in very good, very competent hands today. So Bradley, welcome.
Thanks so much. Let me start my share. So thanks, Lauren, for that kind introduction. This is the first in a series of AI presentations. This one will be a little more general, and then the future ones will be kind of topical, building off of this one. So I consult in the AI field, but it's in a very kind of niche and technical area, and I'm going to try and make this presentation mostly on a general level of stuff that you individually can use in your business or personally, and then some kind of business aspects that you can apply as well. My email is here. You'll get a copy of this presentation next Monday. There's going to be a bunch of links and data and stuff that you can read inside of it. And then please hold any questions until the following 30 minutes. I'm happy to dive into anything kind of technical, general, or whatever you need around the AI. The reality with any AI presentation is that this is published in September of 2023. I don't know how valid all of this information will be in October of 2023. So it's really changing fast, and the kind of temporal updates are important. So I'm going to give you a little bit of an AI macro level, some kind of things to keep in the back of your mind as you're learning about it, using it, all that kind of stuff. Specific use cases, these are all kind of pulled from things that I've used generative AI to do. Some general stuff about businesses and how you guys can employ it to kind of leverage some areas. Importantly, areas of concern, things you should be aware about relative to AI, so that you're kind of aware what comes out of the system and where you can use it and where you should be suspect. A little bit of future looking. So this would be like what's coming down the pike in the next 12 months, maybe 24 months, really hard to see much further than that. And then the last 4 or 5 slides are going to be a bunch of takeaways that if you have a copy of the presentation, you can click through, newsletters you can subscribe to, events that you potentially attend, and that type of stuff. So a little bit of background on me. I'm highly technical. I help enterprises use large language models like the stuff behind ChatGPT, but in a private fashion, pretty technical, and all the kind of databases and stuff that goes around that. But the reality is I'm figuring it out too. So I use ChatGPT to educate myself about enterprise LLMs, vector data stores, all these kind of esoteric technological concepts that it frankly knows better than me. And so it's humbling, exciting, all that kind of stuff. But I'd say at all the core level, I'm just a nerd, and I love figuring out technological problems. This is a very complicated technological problem that's slowly becoming easier as we kind of abstract all the deep nitty-gritty technical stuff out so that people can use it. And I think ChatGPT is probably the best example of turning something highly complex into something that is accessible by a 5-year-old. I always felt that this particular quote from Pablo Picasso was interesting. I don't know how applicable it is anymore. I mean, I've grown up using and programming computers and building companies based off of computers and software. And I've always felt that the computers were a large calculator. And I've seen things that would indicate to me that we're not in the era of calculators and complex calculators anymore, that there's something that it's hard to put your finger on in terms of creativity that these systems are able to deliver now, which is exciting and, unsettling and philosophically, existentially questioning. So that really happened as of November 2022 when ChatGPT came out. Here's just a quick visual example of the pace of progress. Midjourney is one of the best image generation softwares, and the same prompt was fed into it over the course of the last year. And you can see, or actually this is more than a year old, you can see kind of the delta from, actually this was only about 6 months. So from a boy in the rain, and you can kind of look at the image quality as a few months later on a more dystopian level. You can look at this crazy Ronald McDonald, same prompt, fed into DALL-E, which is the OpenAI version, and then Midjourney, which was the leader in the thing right now. It's about a 6-month evolution in quality from something that just looks a little artistic and abstract to something that's frankly frightening. Another little piece of information on some AI stuff. Jasper.ai is an AI copywriting tool. And I just heard a presentation from their CEO at the local marketing AI conference that in the last year, 15 billion words have been written with Jasper. So that's using a generative AI system. That one's based on top of GPT-3 to generate copy. So the blog post that you're reading, the website that you're reading, there's a chance that it came through Jasper AI. So think about that when you're kind of interacting with stuff. I'm going to give you a little bit of broad brush of some things that you think about in the back of your mind as you're thinking about AI, and kind of stuff that you can internalize. Maybe if you take 1 or 2 of these and internalize them, it can actually make more difference than even just say a tool. This is the worst artificial intelligence you'll ever use. So if you're using ChatGPT now, GPT-4, and you're impressed with it, in a couple of years, it's going to look like the Model T, which is amazing because I feel that between Midjourney and ChatGPT, we're at the capability of really being creative. And this is, I mean, if you look at the pace of change from that Midjourney one a couple of slides ago, you'll realize what we're in for down the future. So it's like, okay, great. We're really working with a wonky model right now that actually seems pretty sophisticated. We have a PhD level assistant with us at all times right now, whether you choose to engage it or not. ChatGPT, GPT-4 can pass the medical boards. It's very sophisticated. It's not perfect, nor would any human you interact with be perfect. But you have this tool available, and it needs to be understood and dealt with in a language and in a method that is germane to it. And I'm using pronouns because it's frankly disconcerting that it seems to have humanistic qualities. But think about it as an extremely smart generalist that you have at your side for all kinds of tasks that you can do. And we'll go into some use cases after this from business wise. This one took me a lot of this was a pause for me in terms of kind of integrating generative AI into my life and how it helps day-to-day business, even just personal exploration. I always felt that it was cheating. that I'm asking this model to do things and process things. And the piece that I've made with it is that if I know how to do it without ChatGPT and it speeds it up, it's not cheating. And that's the rub. That's the rub that we're going to be talking about as, you know, society in terms of education and our children and college and all that type of stuff, is where's the line between kind of your own human understanding and using this tool to essentially have a cheat code or a shortcut. And everybody's going to have to make their own ethical line on it. But I had a lot of pause early on of using it because I felt that, you know, if it was using it to write a bio summary or something like that, that was cheating. Well, I mean, I use it every day for that type of stuff, and I find that I just kind of edit stuff down, and I don't use it to necessarily do my hard thinking. It's tough to think about using AI first because it hasn't been there for all of our lives, and it's something that I have to put at the front of my brain to say, hey, whatever problem I'm working on, presentation, maybe even strategy ideation, you know, why don't I pass it through one AI or multiple AIs, you know, get some ideas about how to proceed with it. It's still taking me some time. Learn it yourself, but I have a neighbor who's a teacher at a local school, and, you know, in the high school, I'm like, the thing that is probably the most material benefit to his students is going to be teaching them about how to use AI as they progress off into college, because it's multidisciplinary. It'll cross physics, it'll cross math, it'll cross English. And how do you use it, and how do you instill a sense of responsibility and ethical use in your children, or folks that report to you, is a huge kind of component. How are you going to do that if you don't understand how to use the system yourself? And so before letting it get out of control, either inside of your company or with a child, it's important to kind of master or grasp it, at least on a, call it a superficial level, so that you can guide a little bit better. And then I guess the final meta kind of level is just get involved, raise your hand. There's so much opportunity right now to be an expert, to be a leader, to be an advocate for AI. And it's on a individualistic basis, it's a good place to be in terms of career security. If there's worries about, well, what's AI going to displace, or how is this going to work out in the future, the person that's the expert and the capable one and directing the policy and learning about it and volunteering is the one that's going to be steering that ship. And so it's going to be a secure spot. Plus, to me, it's a very, you know, kind of intriguing area to be in. I'm going to run through some quick use cases. We don't need to read all of this, but I'm going to go over ChatGPT, which is the generative AI front end to GPT-4 through OpenAI. Claude, which is the generative AI front end to Anthropic's large language model, and Midjourney, which is a graphical generator, so generative AI. There's a whole bunch of other AI that we're not going to talk about because that AI isn't necessarily the most impactful in kind of your day-to-day life, day-to-day business. But I'm happy to chat about some of that stuff later. So here, I'm just going through some use case applications, looking at the world as a salesperson. And one of the things that I find very useful, because I was trained on the Sandler style of selling, is very psychological side of type of selling. And one of the kind of aspects of what they do is something called mirroring, which is mirroring both in body language and then also kind of grammatical language. So if you're a sales rep and you're talking to a buying group that's a CEO, a VP, a couple like developers, they each talk differently. They have just certain words and ways that they create grammar. I've used this extremely effectively to create mirroring. So when I want to reply to something or propose something to a CEO or a CIO or a developer, I will have ChatGPT turn a corpus of things that they've communicated to me previously in emails into an outgoing email. And what I'll say is, hey, I want to communicate this particular thing, but I want to do it in the voice of this person who I'm going to give you like 4 or 5 examples of how they talk. I'll edit it down, but it kind of captures it. It resonates with that person. It's a psychological trick, which is kind of what Sandler is based off of. Find this extremely valuable. This particular example was like responding to a spam email. I just said, hey, I don't want to get any more spam emails. Maybe I'll respond back and use the voice of this particular person to do it. It really pulled out some of the interesting pieces and kind of crafted it in the right way. So the mirroring aspect is very valuable to me. Another AI use case for sales is research. So a gentleman I know in Cleveland, Paul Rietzer, who's pretty deep in the AI space and the marketing side, I just said, hey, craft a summary of his LinkedIn profile. All I did was copy and paste the giant LinkedIn profile. I used the front end called Claude, which is Anthropic's one. And the reason I chose to use Claude on this one is that Claude accepts up to 75,000 words as input. ChatGPT maybe 4,000. So if you want a long format thing and you want to say, hey, summarize this person's LinkedIn profile, pull out the things that I might want to talk about with this person in a meeting, in a phone call. I could have scanned through that stuff myself and pulled it out, but this was able to do it in 10 seconds. So it's copy, paste, process. And then I read through it. I'm like, you know what? I really like 0.45. Those ones resonate with me. I think that's something common that we can talk about. Huge time saver in terms of the research phase before meetings. Another example is a Roblox coding example. So this pops over in the developer side. So my son is a big Roblox player, and he wants to make levels. He has all these designs. He has all the graphical pieces. But when you get a little bit sophisticated, you actually have to do some coding. And so he wanted to be able to figure out how to teleport a character from one spot to the other. And so we just went through ChatGPT and did it. I know how to code, but I don't know anything about Roblox and how to do it. So I had a conversation with ChatGPT. We started talking about Roblox in general, and then some examples for teleportation scripts, and then the really nuanced details of how do you attach that to a particular spot or destination or source. And we got to the end part. So I ended up getting to the part where we could now teleport back and forth between sections of the Roblox area. And we were able to do that in 15 minutes or so. But I think more importantly, with my son, he now knows that he can figure things out through ChatGPT. And so he's done an iteration of things. It was frankly amazing to see how quickly he took to it, because he didn't have the same hangups that I did about not wanting to use it. Just like, wow, I have a tool that lets me do these things I want to do in Roblox really fast. And if it doesn't work, I could just tell the tool it didn't work and it can help me figure it out. It's amazing. So it's unlocked this whole kind of world for him that allows him to program without being a sophisticated, pretty much like an adult level programmer. But it could be used in a lot of business applications. Another thing that I use it for is self-education. So I read an article about quantum computing and AI. I've heard about quantum computing for a long time. I knew it could solve cryptographic problems, a lot of stuff like that. Never really understood it. And I still didn't understand it about after reading this article in Time. So I rolled through a bunch of questions about quantum computing and how it works with AI, and a specific use case example of a 433 qubit quantum computer. And I finally, after like 5 questions, got to the point where I understood how it worked, which is it was able to manipulate data inside of a quantum state using quantum gates and then measuring it at the end. So this option to have a giantly parallel processor running because of quantum kind of entanglement. And so, or not entanglement, quantum, just quantum properties. And so it was a 10-minute thought. And I feel like I have a general understanding as a layman of how it will work and where it would impact into AI. I use it a lot for education. I'm constantly popping questions into it. It's a quick marketing example. A buddy had a marketing spreadsheet, which I put into Code Interpreter in ChatGPT. And he needed to kind of separate out things from a certain newsletter and things from another newsletter as to how many clicks and hits kind of came off of them. out of one single spreadsheet. So easy to kind of talk about in English, but actually relatively complicated to do in practice. And so we just went through explaining it in English to ChatGPT. It didn't do it exactly right. We needed to change the columns. We needed to save it as a CSV. We needed to save it as 2 CSVs. And then eventually we got there. Probably took 15 minutes. But if I thought about how long it would take me to code something like that or do it via hand, I mean, it's hours of work to be able to do both of those things. And you're able to kind of adjust it on the fly in conversation. So those are some just kind of ChatGPT use cases. Here's a Midjourney use case. It's a similar thing where it's a prompt, but it generates graphics. And so you can use all kinds of your creativity inside of the prompt. Here's a marketing example to create some sort of a perfume brand. Here's an example to create a kind of a car advertisement. Interesting one about this one is it looks generally acceptable. When you look a little closer, you see that some of the car fobs don't have keys on them, and it just doesn't quite fit. But on a general blush, it looks interesting. You can kind of work those things out when you use the AI. We'll go through some business applications. On a broad use case example, I read a lot through McKinsey, and here's some areas at the top part of the chart where AI will have the most applications. So we went through a sales use case, a marketing use case, software dev, and then one that we haven't touched on is customer operations. So customer support is an area a lot of businesses are looking to use AI to optimize. I've seen certain businesses, at one particular example, where they've actually turned the voice front end of their customer support into an AI. So it's basically an AI that backs into their trouble ticketing case resolution system, and it speaks. So it does text to speech, and it solves like 70-80% of the frontline things. You still talk to a human, but essentially it's from a human perspective of a user. I would rather talk to an AI if I don't have to wait on hold and get my question answered in 5-10 minutes or something like that. I'm okay talking with a computer. When it can't solve the problem, it's a little frustrating, but that's one of the more sophisticated use cases. The less sophisticated use case would be just to have some sort of a chat bot that helps folks resolve things via chat, using the same kind of thing without the voice aspect. Another use case is a chat bot, but only the AI or only the support agents have access to it, so that they can kind of use it as a crib sheet, and then just a basic knowledge-based front end, which it doesn't necessarily solve problems directly, but gives people access to information. Sales and marketing, we talked about some of the prospecting and lead gen. You can use it for email communications. I use it a lot to craft presentations, mostly for like bullet point outlines, but not necessarily for the deep kind of content. And then one of the ones we'll see later is kind of how Salesforce is looking at improving AI around the CRM and how you interact with all the data inside of your CRM. Software is a huge use case. You can use it for creating new code if you just give it some English examples. I found it to be very useful for debugging. And then the latter two aspects, which are kind of the bane of any programmer's existence, is testing and documentation. They're always light. You want to write the code, get it working, and then move on to the next kind of project you have. You don't want to spend the extra 30-40% of your time creating really legible documentation for other people to read or potentially external API users to read. This thing's phenomenally well suited to automating that. And there's some specific code kind of ones, code interpreter being one of them, but there's also some stuff coming out through Meta and Llama that are very code kind of oriented. Another kind of corporate example of how somebody has taken data that they have. Bloomberg created a large language model similar to GPT-4, but basing it off of Bloomberg's probably half-century worth of financial data. So it's proprietary data, and the only way you can talk to it and interact with it is by using the Bloomberg service. So just an example of a corporate use of how you can monetize internal data that you already have. Health systems also have this possibility. Financial service providers have this possibility. Some other kind of things to think about on the business level is talk about all these applications and how you use it individually. But to really get traction, what I've found, folks that are being successful have either an AI counsel or someone who's raised their hand and is like the AI expert or AI advocate. That's really important because you can bring in a consultant to do a certain project, or you can do a proof of concept, but stuff's changing pretty quick. You need to have somebody that's on top of it for like the majority of their time so that they can continue to shepherd and guide it as you evolve your policies, procedures, and approach. And it's also important to create a safe space to experiment with AI. A lot of people don't know what's going on. All of us don't know what's going on all the time. So we're kind of playing with it, experimenting with it. We're going to make some mistakes. Somebody's going to put out a blog post that maybe reflects badly on the brand. That stuff's going to happen. You're going to have policies and controls, but that stuff will happen. And you need to know that it's okay to experiment, because that's how you're going to learn in depth about it. Some areas of concern. So all that stuff's great. It can automate things. It can, add a lot of efficiency to your day. It can touch different areas of the business. It can be involved in deep process stuff and individual contributor stuff. But you have to be somewhat responsible about it. And definitely take the risk, play around with it, but have a little bit of discipline. Policies. So it's important for anyone who's ever created an HR manual to know that it's good to have some policies. I have a link here, so you'll be able to get that in email, to a copy of the City of Boston's generative AI policy. Tokyo has recently released a generative AI policy for all of their employees, the City of Tokyo's employees. There's a bunch more that you can find online, but you should have a policy. Because if you don't have a policy, it makes you look as a corporation a little bit irresponsible. And it also brings up things that you should be thinking about. And the City of Boston one's actually a great place to start. You can look it up online too. You don't need to go off of this link. Accuracy. If you sit and, swivel your chair around and talk to the person next to you, how accurate is the information coming out of them? Well, this stuff's no more accurate than that. In fact, it's prone to things called like hallucinations and making things up. Sometimes it's not 100% reliable. So just know that going in, and know that there are certain things that it's pretty good at, like general knowledge, things like quantum computing, which even would seem esoteric. There's a lot of knowledge out there. The way these generative models are trained is on a giant corpus of text on the internet, talking about all kinds of things. So if you think about it as like a statistical average, if something's being talked about a lot, generally the LLM will be able to have a good piece of reasoning on it. If something's narrowly talked about or has been talked about in a time-sensitive way, it's not a really good, it won't have a really good answer, and you need to be able to sniff that out. And so for me, the accuracy of what comes out is always by default suspect, and then can be confirmed into something that I would like to kind of put out. And I find when it's more general knowledge, the accuracy is excellent, which is why it can pass the medical boards. It's not good at current events. All of these things are trained and kind of stamped out at a particular time. I think GPT-4 is like November or December of 2021. So it doesn't have knowledge of specific events after that. It's just not a good spot for it. It's more of a general reasoning engine. It's not like a fact lookup thing, which would be more what the semantic web is for. Authenticity. When you see something digital, whether it's a blog post in the Instagram feed and LinkedIn, I'm kind of the opinion I don't believe it's necessarily authentic. Authentic meaning it came from a human. It's suspect to me. And I find like images to be extremely suspect because I've seen how they get generated. So I would say just assume it isn't necessarily authentic, especially things like blog posts or product reviews and all of that. It's just coming out of an AI engine. So it's something to give you pause before even pulling something from the web and saying, yeah, this is a good thing. I don't believe this is any different than any reasoning that we've done in the past. It's just the volume of the fire hose is gigantic. So the authenticity is going to come. The people have talked about putting watermarks and things on AI. I don't think that's going to actually happen. But there's talks about ways to try to figure out authenticity. Bias. So these AI systems, GPT-4, Anthropic's Claude, they're trained on this giant corpus of web data. Well, who's on the web? Are certain people overrepresented? Are certain people underrepresented? Are certain opinions overrepresented or underrepresented? There's a bunch of studies out there that show there's a high bias towards white males because they're writing more, they're on more of the internet. And so that just becomes the raw material that the large language models ingest. So know that just because this is a generalist model, it's pulling from the internet. So whatever the inherent bias of the internet is, and it can have some ugly opinions. It can have some, gender-based biases. It can have race-based biases. Realize that it's baked in there. Folks are trying to mitigate that, but it's trained on the biases that we have because we've gone and put them out on the internet. And so it's something to be aware of, and it's not a negligible thing. So just be aware that these things have ideas. Legal aspects. All these images that I've made in here, I made through Midjourney, or almost all of them. They're not subject to copyright. So anything that you make that has been created through some sort of a computer or generative AI, you cannot hold a copyright on. Additionally, if you take something private inside of your company and post it into a public generative AI like ChatGPT, if on the possibility that leaks out because they've used it to retrain their model, even though they say they don't, it's no longer a trade secret. I'm not a lawyer, it's not legal advice, but once a trade secret gets out there, it is no longer a trade secret. If the formula for Coca-Cola is out there, they have nothing to do about it. It's just out there now for the public. So just be aware that if you're taking internal, private, proprietary PII data and putting it out into public systems, you're running a risk. And there's ways to get around that, but those are two kind of big caveats. So what's coming up next? Agency, and I'll whip through these pretty quick. Agency, which means I can have a series of tasks like book a flight, then based on when I arrive, make a dinner reservation, and then based on when dinner's done, make a Broadway show reservation. That notion of agency is coming down the pike. It's not there yet. It's not. It starts to fall off after kind of the second level, but that's kind of a use case people are chasing after. Multimodal. So if you're diagnosing a patient and you have their chart history, you have a lot of graphics, you have some testing temporal history, the notion that you could feed those all into the system versus having an AI image one, an AI text one, an AI time one, separately kind of coming to a decision. The notion of being able to put them all in at the same time is something coming down the pike. Large prompt size, we talked about Claude versus ChatGPT. Being able to put a huge library of data in there so that it didn't a priori know about it, but he can use that while it's figuring out what to do. So this could be things that are similar to, more recency data. It could be stuff that's particular to you, things that are like your writing history or whatever, to help it kind of craft things in a way that's more tailored to you. So the prompt sizes and how much data you can feed into there are going to get larger and larger over time. We're going to get specialized LLMs. If you think about it as a brain and senses, we're going to have large language models that are tuned to particular senses. They're going to speak languages like the language of finance, the language of databases, the specific programming languages, versus being more of a generalist. This type of stuff's already happening out there, but the actual operation of LLMs will be more of like the brain and the senses in your body, as opposed to a bunch of separate niche subject matter experts. They'll coordinate together in the way that our external senses coordinate with our brain. And then we're going to integrate on the enterprise side this kind of large language model brain with internal corporation data. This stuff's already happening right now, but it's at the infancy. Most folks are in the strategy sessions. They're not in the let's go take all of our data stores and implement it. But the important part about the enterprise piece is that it'll tend to be walled off from the outside world, because you don't want proprietary enterprise data leaking out into any sort of public area. So that's kind of like the stuff that I'm mostly focused on. People will be integrating AI into particular pieces of software. So Microsoft's going to be launching Copilot soon. All of your Microsoft apps will have an AI engine, which is backended into GPT-4 through their OpenAI partnership. So in PowerPoint, you'll be able to do things a lot quicker. And so this will be super powerful. Google is doing the same thing. Salesforce is integrating what they call Einstein so that you can ask questions of all that interesting and Salesforce data and automate from it. Photoshop's already released the ability to use generative AI to add things like, hey, I have a small picture, I want to increase the frame. So the right thing is from generative AI, the left thing is the raw photo. And then that's kind of like what's going on in the future. There's some general resources I'll have. I won't pop through all of them. This is more like state of the market stuff, a ChatGPT cheat sheet. So you can kind of get some ideas about how to use it effectively. Some Cleveland resources. There's a lot of stuff going on at ThinkBox and Case. There's some meetups that you can join. And then we have a Marketing AI Institute here in Cleveland, and a Marketing AI conference is the largest one in the world that's based out of here. Here's the newsletters that I read every day. You can subscribe to them if you care to go kind of into the technological depth. Probably spend an hour to 2 hours reading through these newsletters every day. Some folks on Twitter that you could follow. Some tech courses that you can take. I found the deep learning courses on Coursera to be awesome if you want to dive into figuring out what goes on inside of the black box of these large language models. Is not a mechanical Turk. It's something very deep and powerful. And then I guess the final bow to tie on it is we talk about all this AI and how it can improve all of our lives and capabilities and efficiencies and use cases. But kind of what's left or what's powerful. And to me, the powerful thing, or the thing that we're going to need to be intentional about as we use these assistants and systems, is we can't lose our human connection to other humans. And that's going to take us being intentional, because it's going to be a siren song of using AI for everything. And the notion of sitting back in your house and using AI to automate your job and your life has some positives, but we lose something kind of powerful there. And it's just something we need to all pay attention to and be intentional about going out in the community, going to work and interacting, and finding ways to kind of connect on a human level. That will be something that will be differential as AI really starts to take off. So that's the presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Talk about bang for your buck right there. I think that was about 40 minutes, and I learned an insane amount of information. So let's get over to Q&A. Thank you so much, Brad. We already have a question in the coffer, and I even have a couple questions in case some of you are feeling quiet today on a Friday. Ari is wondering, do you think it's worth paying for an AI like ChatGPT 4 versus the free versions like ChatGPT 3?
Yeah, great question. To me, it's, are you going to use it? So it's not worth paying for it if you're not going to use AI, but I pay for the $20 a month version because their premier version, GPT-4, is like an order of magnitude better than GPT-3.5, whatever the free version is. So if you use it a bit during the month, $20 a month is not a lot to pay. If you're just experimenting with it, you can get use out of it for 3.5. But you know, I'm using it in business presentations and stuff. I want the highest powered tool I can possibly get.
Thank you. You guys can put your questions in the Q&A, or you can raise your hand and I can unmute you and you can ask that way. While you're thinking of your questions, I have a couple questions for you, Brad. So the first one is, I know that we're all coming to this conversation with widely ranging understanding of AI. And one of the questions is, how do you find and get on some of these platforms and softwares? Is it as simple as Googling Mid-Journey?
Yeah. So when you get a copy of the presentation, if you know, as everybody gets it, a lot of those slides will have links. So there was like a slide where I just said ChatGPT, Mid-Journey, and Claude. You could just kind of click through them. So you search for those things and you go to the site and check them out. Midjourney's a little bit more interesting. You can sign up at the site, but they use a software called Discord, which the younger gamer crew will know what that is. The older crew like me has to learn what things like that are. But it's essentially like Slack, if you're familiar with Slack or Microsoft Teams, and you actually interact with it through that. So it's like a chat window, and you say, imagine imagine the next generation of AI tools or something like that, and it will craft it in the Slack channel, and you can kind of download it from there. So it's a unique way that they present their thing, whereas Claude and ChatGPT are through a pretty typical chatbot interface.
Got it. Thank you.
Yeah.
I think we had a question, but it looks like they put their hand down. So if you change your mind, you can bring that back. Tammy is wondering, do you have links to resources or ideas for resources for junior high or high school students?
Like for if you were in junior high and high school and you were trying to figure out how to use it?
I'm assuming so. Tammy, you're welcome to unmute yourself if you would like to articulate a little more clearly. Okay.
Yes, or someone that's maybe struggling a little bit academically, finding their voice in writing and things like that. Very smart, but just struggling a little.
Yeah. So would the person who consume this, would they be an educator who's helping that person, or is this more of just give it to the student and let the student self-educate?
It's for my niece, so I would help her if I could. I think it would take some mentoring, a little bit, very creative, but just, a little bit of a learning disability that is holding her back. And I use the ChatGPT to help me with writing and for presentations and stuff. So I'm just wondering if there's something that would be available for a younger set.
So I think maybe a step would be for you to think in the context of how could I frame the stuff that I do for a younger person, and maybe a good kind of legend or context would be, I had a link in the presentation to a ChatGPT cheat sheet, which is like little nuggets of how you can interact with it to get value out of it, like just different ways. And so there's a bunch of those type systems, or we'll call them cheat sheets, that you could maybe take a look at and say like, oh, okay, these are some prompts or some methods I can interact with it that would be applicable to somebody in junior high. And one of the like super quick, one of the super quick kind of capabilities there is the ability to say, could you explain this to a 10-year-old? And so I use that, or I don't necessarily use 10-year-old, but I'll use it. Can you explain this more simply? And so if they ask a question and it becomes too complex, the notion that they have that pressure release valve to say, hey, just make this this part maybe a little bit easier for me to understand, it's pretty good at that. So that's a little trick, but the cheat sheets will have a lot of other tricks and tips that could be applicable to somebody in a junior high kind of level.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks, Tammy.
Thanks, Tammy. Thanks, Brad. We're getting inundated now, so I'm going to try to take everyone in the order that they were coming in. So we'll go to Angelina. I'm going to allow you to talk, Angelina. Go ahead, please.
Hello. I had a question about like the copywriting, right? So if I use ChatGPT to help me make a model that I want to sell with licensing, I wouldn't be able to get that copyrighted because I use ChatGPT.
Explain what a model is.
Like a model for like programming. So if, like, for instance, if Case is trying to do something and they need programming, and I'll be like, I can sell you the model because I have it copyrighted, and you can purchase the license yearly.
Sure.
Would I be able to get the model that I write and I just put it into ChatGPT to make it more smoother?
Yeah. So Yeah, so this is a nebulous area. There is some case law, and I'm not an attorney, so I'm not going to give you like legal advice. But the kind of black and white is the output of a model like ChatGPT or Midjourney, you cannot copyright. But there's a notion that you can assemble things together into some sort of a larger entity, like you, meaning a human, can hold a copyright. So if you assemble them together, like think about making a stew, you've put all those ingredients in the stew. None of the ingredients could be copyrighted, but the stew itself can be copyrighted because you've used some of your own creative human capabilities to put it together. So I think there's ways to accomplish what you want to do. You just can't take it solely directly out of one of these AI models, or frankly from anything that's a computer directly. And so that's I think how you can accomplish what you need, Angelina.
Okay, I get what you're saying. Yeah, because they're my thoughts. I use ChatGPT to just place them in a supported way versus just scattered coming out my head.
Yeah, absolutely. That's what I use it for too.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. The next question we have is, I've been wanting to learn how to program with AI, and I'm wondering where to begin.
Yeah, so kind of like the example that I had with my son, I think I wouldn't use it just from I want to learn how to program. I think if you want to go from the very general, I want to learn how to program, go to Coursera, and there's phenomenal programming courses. Like I want to learn how to program in Python, and it'll go all the way from the very basic hello world to making more complicated things. You need a little bit more structure. But if your idea is, I generally know how to program and I want to do this, like you have an idea about the thing, like in my son's case, it was, I want to know how to teleport my character from this spot to this spot in Roblox. It's a good spot for that. Where it will come in handy, though, is if you go and take a Coursera course. I'm sure there's free ones. There's other ones that are $50 a month. They're great for Python. Where ChatGPT comes in the most handy is it's like having that PhD TA sitting next to you who can explain these complicated topics in a way that you can understand. Hey, I'd like another example, or how do you really do that, or whatever. So you can be doing your coursework, not using it to cheat and like figure out the answers, but like be like, okay, I don't understand what the professor said. Whether you're doing it in a physical class or on a Coursera class, it is a huge help when you're going through that. I took a bunch of AI courses through Coursera, and I mean, it's like vector calculus and deep statistics, linear algebra, like things that I haven't done since like high school, early college. It was a lot in a short amount of time, and I used it as my TA, who I could ask any question, as dumb as possible question. I could ask for as many examples, and they would never get tired of answering me and help me through my courses. So that would be my suggestion. If you're looking to program, use one of the bite-sized Coursera courses where, hey, if you want to work today on programming, great. If not, you can do a little couple 5-minute segments tomorrow and use it in concert with ChatGPT. You can use the free version, if you're a student and don't want to pay for it. It will be a huge help in terms of you leveling up your skills. And then you'll get to the point where now I can accomplish specific tasks. I want to do X, Y, or Z. You'll have those kind of skills, and it can help you in that kind of part of your career.
Thanks, Brad.
Yep.
We're coming in hot here. So the next question is, some of your examples showed things like creating Excel spreadsheets or PowerPoint presentations. Do these AI tools actually create these files for you?
Right. So they're getting there. The Excel one can be created, actually creates CSVs. It doesn't create Excel files, but essentially formatted files. That's through Code Interpreter. I forget what ChatGPT renamed it. It's part of their premium package. PowerPoint does not exist yet. Microsoft is adding on the thing called Copilot to all of their, so Word, PowerPoint, Excel. Google, I think, already has something for Sheets and in their own doc format. But that that will then have the ability to kind of craft PowerPoint. I was like, hey, craft a 5-thing PowerPoint talking about the difficulties of building a generative AI system. That's coming down the pike. I'm in queue as a beta client. I will give them as much money as they want for that ability because it'll be a huge improvement. So it's not there yet. That's in a what's next, but what's next will be like in the next, hopefully 3 to 6 months, you'll be able to do that type of stuff.
Great. The next question is a little bit about academia, but I want to see if you'd like to give it a stab.
Sure.
Teaching undergrads at university, your opinion using ChatGPT to extend learning versus relying on it to supply already thought out online knowledge.
Yeah, so I forget what the term is, pedagogy.
Pedagogy.
But you know, you have these methods of teaching that have evolved. There's actually there's an educator, he's an associate professor at Wharton. His name's Ethan Mollick, Mollick. And he has put together I think it's a 8-part YouTube series, little 20-minute kind of segments on how to adapt teaching to this notion that everybody's going to be using ChatGPT. Like, it doesn't matter whether you want them to or not, they're going to be using it. So how do you, to that slide I had earlier about not using it for cheating, how do you adapt the way that you teach so that you're teaching to the strengths of what this thing can do, but you're ensuring that students are mastering skills so that they're using this as a master carpenter. They're not using it and just basically outsourcing their brain. And so they're professional educators, and they've gone into a lot of the detail about how to craft the way you educate. And he said it at Wharton, which is, you know, prestigious. It's very difficult. Folks have built their kind of capabilities over 30 years as professors, and they have to kind of flip a bunch of things on their head. But the thing that Ethan would be as a kind of a chorus on that is it's here. You have to adapt to it. You can't, there's no going to be filtering it out. There's no way to detect it particularly. So just embrace it. And he gives all kinds of examples, and it comes from the spot of an educator, a professional educator. And so check that out. Ethan Mollick, genius, really fun guy. He actually was at the Marketing AI conference here in Cleveland. But lots and lots of good things to say.
Thanks, Brad. And Beth, Harvard also has a lot of think pieces, of course. I mean, academia is having a big conversation about this because it is so transformative to education. So you can find a lot of think pieces. If you're more of a reader, if you're more of a viewer or listener, it sounds like Ethan Mollick is also a really great resource. So thank you, Brad, for that.
Yep.
Another question from Jay. How do AI Pro and Copy.ai integrate with ChatGPT?
I haven't used either of those. I don't know. So like ChatGPT has a plugin section. If you use the Pro one, a lot of these features come with the Pro one that I know creates interconnections between it and other pieces of software. I just haven't used any of those like Copy.ai or whatever. So I don't have a good answer on it, but I know that's the way they have integrations. The just point and click integration is copy paste between them. It's not really an integration, but so I don't have a good answer on that one.
That actually feeds into the next question that maybe you can elaborate a little bit on is how do the plugins on ChatGPT 4.0 enhance your ability to use the service versus the lack of having them on newer versions?
Yeah, so this is not an area that I've played around with a lot, but just the general concept of plugins is like, okay, I've done a lot of work in a particular piece of software like PowerPoint which is not one of the plugins, but some piece of software. I want the brain of ChatGPT to be able to work with that data, but I don't want to have to like cobble it together between, with copying and pasting and things like that might lose some of the context. So it's the notion of, hey, I can work within the system that I want to work and kind of leverage the brain of ChatGPT on top of it. So I think there's a huge amount of power with that. Now, if the notion is a new version of ChatGPT or, you know, the back end GPT-4, if GPT-5 comes out and doesn't have plugins, there's a weight balance of like, okay, well, it's so much more better at these things, but it doesn't integrate into what I'm doing. Maybe I'll use it for certain cases, but not for other cases, because I need the kind of fluidity inside of the way that I operate. But for me, I tend to always go for whatever the most sophisticated one is. And then I'll work my way around the other stuff.
Great. We've got 3 more questions. Tammy is wondering, can APIs used to pull large public data into an AI model? Can APIs be used?
Yeah, so this starts to get a little more on the technical side. So we've been talking about mostly the consumer side. You go log in, you know, ChatGPT chat, you type it in, the stuff we've all used. Once you go at the deeper level of interfacing to things via APIs, like pulling stuff, interfacing to chat or GPT-4 via API, yes, it can, but it's done in a way that's called retrieval augmented generation. So basically what happens is you store that database of information in a place. And what happens is a query comes in and you use the data in that database to kind of augment your query. So it could be like time-based data or, you know, whatever specific data that you want that the model doesn't necessarily know. So what it is it's a way to make that model smarter without having to retrain it. They've spent hundreds of millions of dollars training these models. You as an end user don't really have the ability to train it, but you can give it more context. And so what businesses will use it for is, hey, I want this thing to do customer support for me. It's going to talk to my customer support database of like all these things that I've solved over time. But ChatGPT doesn't know anything about that. That's, you know, within the domain of your company. So you can think about it as just a use case of any type of proprietary API-based data. You can feed it in on the fly using something called retrieval augmentation generation. So it's RAG.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
Well, we actually only have time for 1 more question. So I will get your opinion on Raymond's question. How will AI change the way lenders approve or deny business loans?
Yeah, so they already use AI systems in terms of business loans. There's actually been some chatter about bias in the systems. Like, is it biased against, you know, I don't know, people based off of race or gender, things like that. So the interesting conversations going off of that. But it's not like where the AI systems really shine is where there's a huge amount of underlying data and you're looking at patterns in it. If you look at any of our histories as maybe a business person or a personal credit, there's just not a gigantic amount of data. Like the systems that they've built to make credit determinations are pretty good already. It's not like a self-driving car where you have millions of pieces of data coming in every day and you're learning and learning and learning so much more. So I don't know that it's going to have a giant change in impact. And then on the other side with business loan generation or origination, there's usually a very human aspect to it too. Like before giving you $500,000, somebody wants to meet you and shake, you know, there's stuff that AI is not going to do. And that I don't know that bankers are going to necessarily want to give up some of those aspects at larger amounts of money. So yeah, I don't see a giant increase in, I don't know, loans or processing or stuff like that. Just because there's real consequences to a bank if they make a bad decision. And, you know, as we get in the business loan area, the consequences get a lot larger than in maybe a personal loan area or a mortgage area. So yeah, sure, there'll be improvements. It's just in all the different kind of financial aspects of where a bank could use this, it may not be the one that has the most.
Thank you so much. I'm going to echo what Jay said in the chat, which is this was an outstanding presentation. So much information. And the best part, everybody, is that Brad will be back next month for another Friday State of AI webinar with all the things that'll change over the next month, which will blow our minds probably. We will include that link in the follow-up email once we hammer down that date. Our next webinar is September 20th from 12 to 2, and that is on presenting with precision and poise. Thank you, Brad. Thank you, folks, for sticking around with us. We'll be sending out a survey right after this call and next week, and we hope to see you next month. Have a wonderful weekend.
Okay, thanks, Lauren.